Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this program, virtual seminar series program on North Korea's international interactions during the COVID-19 pandemic. As many of you know, the East-West Center in Washington has been doing a series of programs that are visible not only on the Zoom link that you are participating, but also simultaneously on YouTube via live stream. So we're delighted that you have chosen to join us, and there are others on other platforms joining us as well. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce our speaker because he is not only a colleague, longstanding colleague, but a partner of the East-West Center and a friend with whom I've had the pleasure of working for some years. First in his role, as many of you know, as a senior advisor to Senator Lugar on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but previously on the Agricultural Committee. He has a particularly distinct and I think interesting approach to this issue, as well as to much of his work, which is that he comes from a policy point of view, he comes from a commercial business point of view, and he is a specialist both on Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, having worked both on the North Korea issue and have traveled and worked extensively in Southeast Asia. So we're delighted to have Keith Luse with us this morning. And Keith, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your collaboration with the East-West Center. And you are going to take up the topic of North Korea's international interactions, and then we'll move to Q&A. We have 1 hour, everyone. And so I would ask you to first hear from Keith, and then we'll move to Q&A and discussion. And the protocol is very simply, if you would share your question on chat or the Q&A function, which Sarah Wong, our seminar coordinator, will manage, then I will read those questions out for the simple reason that they will not be visible to our YouTube live stream participants. And therefore, by reading them out, they will also know what Keith is responding to. So thank you very much, Keith. Welcome, and thanks for doing this. Please, your show.
Well, Satu, thank you for having me today. It's really been pleasure and a privilege in recent years for NCNK to collaborate with East-West Center on the North Korea in the World website. Just as background, Satu, as you may recall, when we initially discussed setting up this website, it was based in part on the fact that it had been my experience, and I know that of many others, that over the years, there had been this assumption in Washington that North Korea is going to collapse. The government of North Korea will not endure. As a result, there really, over time, was not a concerted, consistent foreign policy approach to North Korea. There, again, people on the Hill, sometimes people in various administrations thought, well, why do we really need to deal with this? The country won't be around, the government's going to collapse, and so on. Consequently, not a lot was done through the years. Now, there were exceptions in some administrations, unless North Korea launched a missile or engaged in some sort of provocative action. And then, of course, Congress paid attention, administrations, and so on. So the purpose in this website is to provide information to the public as a whole and to policymakers, pointing out that North Korea is in fact not a hermit kingdom. It is not an isolated country. It, in fact, is very secretive and works to hold close as much as it can information that it believes is none of the business of the outside world. But having said that, you know, through this website, people can go and get a better understanding about North Korea's diplomatic relations, the fact that it has relations with over 160 countries, get some background on multilateral relations between North Korea and the rest of the world, China and North Korea, etc. And so I want to thank my colleague Daniel Wirtz, who's put a lot of this together. I want to thank Ross Tokola of your staff, who's had very important input along the way. And by the way, I should add that there is some recent information added related to China and North Korea trade stats. And there's a lot of background here, not only in terms of China, North Korea in general, but on a provincial basis, categories of trade, etc. And then, by the way, we will be adding a section later that Esther M's working on related to sports diplomacy. But that, again, North Korea, it's not an isolated country. Right. I'm amazed with the fact that in 2017, China issued over 200,000 visas to North Koreans to visit China. Now, indeed, a number of these were repeat visits, but obviously not all. You have 100,000 North Koreans who've traveled out of North Korea to work. Indeed, they've not been paid very well, but they've been out of the country. They've had an opportunity to view other parts of the world. Chosen Exchange out of Singapore has trained over 3,000 North Koreans in Singapore, in Vietnam, in Pyongyang on how to become entrepreneurs. So these are just 3 examples pointing to the fact that North Korea is not isolated in the sense of how policymakers often consider this. And so what we want to do through this website is to help ensure that policymakers, that the public really, that they have more information in terms of basing future policy decisions and so on. But let's get on to COVID-19. The leadership of North Korea took action early on. As COVID-19 progressed in China, the North Korean leadership moved quickly to close the border, establish quarantine protocols. North Korea launched an anti-epidemic campaign. All of this probably resulted in saving lives. However, the extent of the quarantine protocols, the extent of the continued border closure really does have humanitarian consequences, and we can get into some of that later on perhaps. But today there are virtually there's no one entering North Korea, and if you do get into the country, you're looking at a 30-day quarantine. So this is the sort of thing that UN officials in Pyongyang are attempting to negotiate with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to modify the requirements related to this quarantine. Frode Moring, the resident coordinator of the United Nations in Pyongyang, has been unable to return. So you have a skeleton crew of UN officials in Pyongyang. Also, there are a handful of European NGOs who have offices in Pyongyang, and they are operating really with a minimal level of staff now as well. So what the UN would like to do would be to modify the protocol so that there can be greater entry of UN officials, of NGO staff, but also that they be able to travel into the countryside. This is not possible now. That means that people in North Korea, the most vulnerable of the population, who have been receiving treatment for tuberculosis, for multi-drug resistance tuberculosis, for malaria, etc., those treatments are now not occurring. And this is a problem for those patients, but this is also a problem for the larger population in terms of NGOs being able to be active on the ground to not only treat patients, but to help prevent the spread of multi-drug resistant TB and other diseases in the country. So while the negotiations are between the United Nations and primarily the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I doubt that those folks are actually the problem. I would imagine, this is above their pay grade in the sense of establishing what the national protocol will be on quarantines, etc. I would imagine this is the State Security Service. On one hand, they may be trying to prevent the spread of COVID-19 if it's in North Korea, which I think it probably is. On the other hand, perhaps there are things in the countryside they don't want people to see. And I would just say that the longer they wait to allow UN officials to get in, to allow NGOs to get in, to go out and treat people who have specific needs, the longer the security service waits, this is just a disastrous outcome for the most vulnerable in North Korea. But as relates to North Korea and the rest of the world related to COVID-19, Pyongyang really has cast a wide net, sending instructions to diplomats, reaching out, sending signals to contacts they have in other countries for COVID-19 assistance. However, with the demand that no strings be attached to the assistance. Russia, as you have read, has provided COVID-19 kits, probably additional supplies. China has provided a range of assistance as well to North Korea, COVID-19 related as well as many other ways. You have requests that have, and we'll come back to Southeast Asia more in a moment, but requests have been directed to governments and to individuals in Southeast Asia with whom North Korea has contact, making requests for masks, for personal protection equipment, and so on. As relates to Switzerland, generators, personal protection equipment, supplies for disinfecting facilities have been requested of the Swiss by North Korea. The North Koreans will not accept assistance from United States NGOs related to COVID-19. However, North Korea will continue to work with those same NGOs with whom they had pre-existing projects prior to the virus setting in. In terms of South Korea, there have been requests made to South Korea informally from the North for supplies. I don't know the status of that at the point. I do recall that while North Korea is at least indirectly making requests now, and you may remember as well, months ago when North Korea rejected the offer from South Korea for 50,000 tons of rice. So as the COVID situation develops in North Korea or not, you know, if it in fact spreads, if it becomes a crisis, then you will likely see the North reaching out to South Korea, even more so. And at this point in time, it's really difficult to predict the scenario for all of that and what the eventual, I mean, I would imagine that South Korea would want to respond, but there we get into other issues related to North-South, the US ROK alliance, et cetera. So let me leave it at that and see what question you have at this point, Satu.
Satu, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Participants, I'm just noting to remind you, please, to send your question via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen or chat. I know that one colleague, Robert Magner, has raised his hand. I would kindly request that he submit his question through the chat or Q&A function, and then I will read them out. Keith, I want to, before, and as I get some more questions lined up and give people an opportunity to engage, I do want to ask, because you referred to Southeast Asia. Now, the East-West Center, as you well know, and Dan Wirtz contributed to this, you contributed to this series. We did a series of analyses on, as part of the North Korea and the world, North Korea's external relations, on its relations specifically with Southeast Asian countries. Because during earlier time periods, we've had different approaches to our regional allies, partners, friends, and others in the region about what to do about North Korea. For example, early in the Trump administration, under maximum pressure, we sought to have dialogues with our regional friends about North Korea. Can you say a little bit more about the state of those relations? Because some of those relations go back a long way. They're commercial, they're political, they're diplomatic. We all know about the Malaysia incident, in the assassination, et cetera. Could you say a little bit more about where you reckon things are between North Korea and some of the Southeast Asian countries with which it's had relations?
Thank you. I think it's important that you made the point that North Korea-Southeast Asia relations run deep. And they've been there a while, haven't they?
Yes.
You know, we think of the 1960s non-aligned movement conference, Bandung, where President Sukarno made an introduction of Kim Il-sung to Norodom Sihanouk. That, as you know, was the beginning of a long relationship, which ended up having impact not only in the bilateral context for Cambodia and North Korea, but for Southeast Asia in the larger context as well. I found it fascinating over the years to remind myself that when Mr. Mahathir first became Prime Minister in Malaysia, that the first foreign delegation he received was from North Korea. I think that was his way of signaling his interest to the North Koreans and having a relationship, but also signaling to the United States that he would be his own person in that role. In recent years, there have been a number of North Korean restaurants established throughout Southeast Asia. North Korean IT workers working in the region, Malaysia, other countries, and I suspect a number of these IT workers have also used Southeast Asia as a base to launch some of their cyber attacks related to the United States and elsewhere. You've had over the years trading between Malaysia and North Korea, Indonesia, Singapore, and North Korea. The Thai-North Korea relationship has been on and off. I'm really fascinated by the fact that there is a Thai hostage who remains in North Korea today, Anocha Panjoy, who was abducted in May 1978 from Macau. Her case has been one that has not really received consistent attention from Thai authorities over the years. So throughout the region, there has been ongoing contact with North Korea. Often it's been under the radar, not always obvious. And our friends in Southeast Asia have worked to maintain the relations with North Korea, but in a way that would not be considered out of bounds by the US. But as we fast forward to the present, there are a couple of points that I believe are significant related to Southeast Asia and North Korea. One, in parts of you made reference to the assassination in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. In Southeast Asia, there is still some lingering resentment to this killing in the international airport in Malaysia, as well as the reported recruitment of people from Vietnam and Indonesia to assist in that particular project. And Malaysia diplomats were detained for a while in Pyongyang. Secondly, in terms of COVID-19, there is some frustration on the part of people that you and I know in Southeast Asia. You know, they say North Korea has publicly stated it has no cases, but yet North Korea is reaching out to us wanting help, wanting personal protection equipment, et cetera. And so I believe that this is another factor that has not been helpful to North Korea in their efforts to obtain assistance. You may recall seeing the Financial Times article by Ed White and Kong Woo-song in March. And the quote was that North Korean officials have been seeking assistance in private communications. Mm. So here again, private communications sometimes, official communications sometimes, but as far as North Korea is concerned, they wanted no strings attached with any of this assistance.
Well, thank you very much, Keith. That's terrific. And for participants, I would note in the chat section of our platform, I have included a link to the series of Asia-Pacific Bulletin analyses we did on North Korea's relations in the Indo-Pacific with various countries. And there's a real range and mix from regional experts on what their country's relations with North Korea are. And I think you'll find it a fascinating read because as Keith said, these relations go deep back into the post-1945 era. They emanate from lots of sources, personal contacts at the highest levels. There's a range of commercial and diplomatic elements, positive and negative elements, and they've been brought into the nexus as American policy has evolved vis-a-vis North Korea. Let me turn now to questions and comments. We have some lined up here. So the first question is from Mr. Michael Anderson. What is your assessment of US and international media coverage of recent developments in North Korea? Any individual journalists or media groups doing a better job than others? And he's got a couple other questions, but let me give you that one, and then we'll come back to Michael's second round again.
Well, that is a question that I would expect from Michael Anderson, an experienced and longtime public information, really outstanding expert. And Michael, I would just say that the press coverage related to the so-called disappearance of Kim Jong-un at best was bizarre. I'll just leave it at that. I have really nothing else to say, because it became clear after a while that stories were appearing based on other stories, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, and Michael, I'm quite aware that you have another one, but if you'll please permit me, I will take people to have a first round, and then we'll come back as time permits. From Professor Min Ye at Boston University, I am intrigued by the examples of North Korea being engaged in the region. How widespread is this? How is North Korean economic openness this time compared to the early 2000s and the 2010-2012 period, during which there was an expectation for its opening up? Maybe something on the economic element of that.
Sure. Well, North Korea, through the years, has been aggressive in pursuing trading opportunities in Southeast Asia. Having said that, in 2017, we saw a few countries in Southeast Asia respond to the maximum pressure campaign of the US government. For example, in terms of 2017, Singapore and the Philippines barred trade with North Korea. Singapore, I believe, ended the visa program, where the entry-free program where North Koreans could come into Singapore without obtaining a visa. Cambodia in 2017 reported it had expelled over 100 North Korean workers, that had revoked the registrations of some North Korean companies and restaurants. This is particularly significant in my mind, because as we look at the world of North Korea and Southeast Asia, Cambodia has been a very important component of that world.
Right.
North Korea built a museum in Siem Reap. Millions of dollars North Korea spent building this museum in collaboration with Cambodia. I believe the museum is shut down at this point. So for Cambodia, going back again to Sihanouk, Kim Il-sung, who had built a palace in North Korea for Sihanouk, on and on and on. For Cambodia to take the actions it took in 2017, this is quite remarkable. Now, despite what I have stated in terms of the lingering resentment about the killing of Kim Jong-nam in Malaysia, the questions about why is North Korea seeking our help when North Korea says they don't have cases, despite all of that, I would imagine that we will see trade between North Korea and Southeast Asia emerge again, and to whatever degree it's not already occurring. From an American perspective, the administration has worked to shut off trade with North Korea. The United States has worked to enforce sanctions. Our friends in Southeast Asia, as they do with everything else, they will approach this in a balanced context, won't they? They will want to appease the Trump administration, but on the other hand, they will be taking a longer view and want to retain whatever relations they can with North Korea, trade and otherwise.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Keith. And I would just mention, as part of the series that we did on Indo-Pacific relations with North Korea and interviews that we conducted in the region, one big takeaway I had is Southeast Asians were very reluctant to take an either-or approach on North Korea during the maximum pressure campaign. And the general elite consensus appeared to be that breaking diplomatic relations was a sort of, a line they didn't want to cross. They would be willing to abide by international sanctions, UN sanctions, but they weren't willing to cut off all avenues of openness to North Korea just in order to have some leverage and relationships. So that's very useful. We now please
add on this point as well. Prior to the COVID-19 crisis, it was my understanding that North Korea had agreed to participate in 3 Track 2 sessions, one in Southeast Asia, one in Europe, and one involving Europeans elsewhere. Now, the COVID-19 crisis put a hold on all of that. It's my understanding that those events may now be back on the schedule. And so North Korea may in fact be participating in a Southeast Asia Track 2 later this year, as well as the other 2 meetings that I referenced.
And of course, Southeast Asia does give them one platform that they occasionally intermittently use, right? The ASEAN Regional Forum, for example, where they've been present. So Southeast Asia has wanted to keep that going as an opportunity. We now turn to Robert Magner, who has a question. What is the current state of relations with Japan? Is there any dialogue on the virus issue? Are there any ongoing contacts with the Chosun Soren? Thank you very much for that question, Bob Magner.
I would be surprised if there were not ongoing contacts with Chosun Soren, between North Korea and Chosun Soren. That, as you know, over the years has been a very active relationship, sometimes under the radar, more than at other times. As it relates to Japan and North Korea in general, the Japanese obviously are quite concerned about North Korea's continued missile tests, missile launches, what this means for Japan. And from Japan's perspective, the hostilities in North Korea, that certainly enables the leadership in Japan to take a harder line in terms of thinking about the future of Japan, changing the constitution and so on. Having said that, I would imagine that the behind the scenes quiet negotiations, which have been intermittent, but I would imagine that the negotiations between Japan and North Korea on the abductee issue, I would imagine they continue in some shape or form.
Very interesting. Thank you. And thank you, Bob Magner, for joining us and for the question. I now turn to Seho Ashley Park. The question is, do you think the result of the recent general election in South Korea can make Pyongyang easier to approach Seoul for assistance towards the COVID-19 pandemic crisis?
A very good question, a complex question for reasons that the person who asked the question knows. Kim Jong-un is in a situation where, as it relates to the United States, as it relates to South Korea, elections come and go. He knows that. If there is an election outcome that does not please him, or in the case of his father, did not please his father, then they would simply wait, wouldn't they? Or leverage an election outcome to their advantage. Moon Jae-in, even prior to the recent election, Moon Jae-in made it very clear his willingness to engage with North Korea at multiple levels, various opportunities, efforts, largely rejected by the North. So I have no idea how the recent election outcome, how this will be calibrated by Kim Jong-un. He knows that the outcome will give Moon Jae-in a stronger hand domestically in terms of dealing with the North. But I would imagine that Kim Jong-un's calibration on his dealing with the South will not simply be in the context of North-South. Kim Jong-un is interested in seeing the deterioration of the US-ROK alliance. And I would imagine that as North Korea reaches out to the South, there will be a number of factors as part of their consideration. For one thing, it's unlikely that Kim Jong-un will reach out until he believes he can be successful or he can prevail in whatever it is he wants to engage about.
Well, thank you very much. We now turn to Dr. Simon Gray. And this is a question about Kim Jong-un's disappearance, reappearance. Was this a strategic move, or is this more likely a case of COVID-19 infection? I think a question that's been much debated and knocked about on various speculative and media bases and analytical bases. What are your thoughts on this, Keith?
Well, it's a very good question. I would just say that you'll recall during the Politburo meeting prior to his disappearance, his sister, Kim Yo-jong, was promoted again. She came back to the limelight, I believe as an alternate member. And then a few days later, when Kim Jong-un did not appear at the celebration of his grandfather's birthday, an important event, to me, then her ascension a few days earlier made a lot of sense. It was almost as if Kim family was messaging to the North and to the world, leading North Korea is a family affair. And so it's a personal opinion that it's quite likely that at the time of the Politburo meeting, brother and sister knew what the plan was, that he would be out of the scene for a while, for whatever reason, whether that related to a medical procedure, whether that related to other planning he had, or other agendas that he had in mind.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I now turn to our very own Ross Takala, who is also heavily engaged in helping us build the North Korea in the World website, along with your team at NCNK, Keith. Ross asks, at what point do you think the North Korean government might admit to there being cases of COVID-19 in the country? And what in particular do you think is preventing North Korea from being more transparent so far, despite it being known that they're informally asking for help? Why the dual track approach, which obfuscates what's going on?
Well, Ross, first, as you're aware, there is always the issue of face. Secondly, for North Korea to acknowledge COVID-19 officially, that for them, quite frankly, I think would be seen as an acknowledgement of a weakness. We allowed this to happen. And it would also get into the national security area, right? Because COVID-19 does not discriminate. COVID-19, this is not like running a sprint where you know the location of the finish line. COVID-19 is going to be a problem, a threat for months and months, not only for North Korea, but for East Asia, for the world as a whole. And so once they acknowledge that the disease is there, that then requires North Korea to put into place, I believe, a number of other strategies domestically as well as internationally. A road that they probably don't want to go, they probably want to delay going down that road as long as they can.
Thank you very much. I can now turn back, as I wait for other questions and comments, back to Michael Anderson's second round. And he asked, what is your assessment of US policymaking towards North Korea? How is the interagency process working or not working to make US policy towards North Korea?
Michael, another good question. As we've observed, the United States has continued to express its willingness to engage with North Korea. Steve Biegun, as Special Representative, Deputy Secretary of State Biegun, has continued to make that very, very clear. The North Koreans, post-Hanoi, have largely rejected US overtures. North Korea is unwilling to accept US NGO assistance. Despite this rejection by North Korea of US willingness to sit at the table, Despite this, the United States has signed off on exemption requests submitted to the 1718 Sanctions Committee at the United Nations. The United States will sign off on exemption requests to UN sanctions by NGOs wanting to provide COVID-19 related assistance. In fact, the US and other members of the 1718 panel, they now have agreed to a 3-day no objection turnaround on a request for exemptions to UN sanctions. Now, the United States does in fact delineate between humanitarian requests, meaning life-saving, or requests that would be more developmental related. I think that's probably where they draw the line. There was a recent request by the FAO to the 1718 committee that was not approved, in part because it really delved into the developmental area more than humanitarian direct. So Michael, bottom line, the United States in a number of ways has expressed its willingness to not only engage with North Korea overall, but to assist North Korea on matters related to COVID-19. So I think that's positive.
Michael also has one follow-up, Keith, and that relates to opportunities. You know, East-West Center, as you well know, is a congressionally authorized institution to pursue collaborative education, research, and exchange between the United States and Asia. And in that spirit, Michael's question follow-up is about what opportunities exist both at the public level but also private level for exchanges between. Is that something you can see having opportunity in the coming months or years, or is this just too far to think about right now? Because you and I have discussed this. What could we do that would facilitate, you know, legal and approved exchanges?
I think that exchanges in the future will be a very important part of U.S. and North Korea dynamics, U.S. North Korea interaction. As you may recall, there have been in the past a number of North Korean delegations visiting the United States for medical training, ag training, going back to the 90s, et cetera. So this would not be something new, but it would be a renewal of past practice. I would also add on the track 2 front that there is potential for interaction with North Korea, as there has in the past. Now, the State Department does require approval for Americans to participate in track 2 events, and Americans must obtain an OFAC license to do so. But this is, I believe, possible in terms of the process. So this is another venue that long-term is an option in terms of U.S. North Korea interaction. But having said that, during the Obama administration, I believe during the Bush administration, there was often an unwillingness to allow North Koreans to visit the United States according to really other events. In fact, the Trump administration, the same. When President Trump first went into office, he initially signaled his willingness to be involved with North Korea as relates to engagement. In fact, initial approval was given to a visit to New York by a North Korean delegation early in the Trump administration. But once the killing occurred in Malaysia, the administration said no, we will not allow issuance of those visas. So just as that had occurred in this administration, I believe in the Obama administration and in the Bush administration, decisions that were made about North Koreans visiting the United States were often made according to other events, whether or not there were North Korean provocations, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you very much, Keith. I see no other questions. If you do have them, please do use the chat function and Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom platform. And I will have to read them out because, as I mentioned, there are folks joining us via YouTube Live as well simultaneously who cannot see the questions. In the meantime, let me remind people that on the chat function also are links to the series of analyses on North Korea's relations with Indo-Pacific countries, as well as a link to North Korea and the World website, which monitors and analyzes various international interactions of North Korea. And this is a joint project of the National Committee on North Korea, headed by Keith Luse and the East-West Center in Washington. So I'd be delighted if some of you would be interested in that. And as Keith mentioned, Dan Wirtz of NCNK has just put a new series of analyses and material on the China trade relationship with North Korea. And we hope to have new material on the website relating to North Korea's sports exchanges as well internationally. So bear in mind. If there are no other questions, Keith, if there are any other points you'd make, then we can draw the session to a close with just an announcement of upcoming programs. Do you have additional comments?
Well, I would just say that we're likely going to be in for an interesting time with North Korea between now and the presidential election.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
To what degree will North Korea want to provide a distraction to that election or not? Or will the North Koreans simply decide to wait until the election's over to see who is elected and then proceed accordingly from their end at that point? So I think that we're in for potentially interesting days ahead as relates to North Korea and the United States. I might say that to this point, the administration and the Congress continue to support the provision of humanitarian assistance to North Korea, which is important especially for the most vulnerable of North Korea's population. And so I think for the moment, a particularly important point is that North Korea and the UN need to come to some terms so that, to restate my points earlier, so that international workers can get back into the country, so that UN officials will be able to operate in Pyongyang more widely, get out into the country as well. Because we are potentially looking at a disaster situation down the road in North Korea in terms of food supply. You know, there is an interruption of the supply chain in terms of getting products to market. Well, North Koreans, you know, derive up to 70% of their diet from the markets. This is an important thing to know. So we are in for a fascinating time, not only domestically in terms of the United States and our politics in North Korea, but as relates to North Korea and its domestic situation, it is very ominous, I think, unless the security service decides to allow international medical experts, workers to get into the country to do their job. Otherwise, when we take that scenario, you tie that with the interruption of the supply chain, you tie that to the shortage potentially of products in the marketplace, et cetera. This could be very ominous for the people of North Korea long term.
Well, thank you, Keith. Of course, we will be all monitoring this, and you will be much in demand, and hope we will have you back as we pursue also our ongoing cooperation, but also have you back in the future for updates on the North Korea situation. We are coming to the close of the program, and I just see now that there are 2 additional questions. So I'm going to go to those before closing. We have from Professor Min Ye in Boston University. What's the status of North Korea's relations with China? What, if any, projects are going on in the context of COVID? Do you have any thoughts on that? And there are a couple others popping up now too, please.
Well, I'm sure that you already are familiar with the historical North Korea-China relationship. This is a relationship built on mutual need. China, of course, wants to ensure regional stability. China is obviously concerned about the trends in North Korea at the present time, whether that be related to COVID-19 or the potential of disruption in the food supply, et cetera. So there's no doubt in my mind, but what China has been, will continue to provide assistance to North Korea across the board. China is skirting sanctions. China will do whatever it takes to avoid a major disruption within North Korea. And so whatever China may be doing today, which is, I believe, considerable, I'm unable to provide you sort of point by point, but it's considerable, and I believe that that will even be increased in the future, if need be.
Our next question is from Sohee Park. You mentioned earlier about this kind of question that came up about the disappearance and reappearance and the elevation of the sister. So in this context, the question is, will COVID-19 offer further opportunity to solidify leadership domestically, or promoting Kim Yo-jong and her official messages, et cetera? Do you anticipate more of that, signs of that?
Well, that's
what you mentioned.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And, you know, we are all reminded that whether you are living in North Korea or the United States or the Philippines, wherever, the challenge for all of us is to survive this virus, right? And so if in fact the Kim family is able to survive this virus, if in fact the Kim family is able to maintain its leadership position in North Korea, I suspect that the family will actually utilize this epidemic, this pandemic, this time of major challenge to consolidate control. This could provide Kim Jong-un opportunity to proceed with reforms that had been resisted by some of the hardliners around him. And so it is possible, if he is able to navigate this virus within North Korea, it is possible that he may come out of this stronger in terms of leadership than he is presently, and he may be able to proceed with a number of changes he would like to see as relates to North Korea's economy, et cetera, down the road. So I think it's fascinating.
This is a question really about US policy, Keith, rather than North Korea per se. And Dr. Simon Gray asks, do you perceive a change in would you expect a change in US policy if a Democratic president were elected in 2020? Given who you worked for and your long innings in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, you're well aware of the political elements of such policy developments. And what do you think on this question? Do you want to answer this one?
Well, I would just answer in all candor that first, as I observed Senator Biden in the past, who is often pro-engagement, as I've observed candidate Biden in the campaign, there are some dissimilarities to the two Bidens. I have no idea what a Biden presidency would be about, but as with other new administrations coming in, should Biden prevail, first of all, should he be the nominee? Secondly, should he prevail in the election, it will take him some time to review North Korea policy, to get the machinery in place. And of course, North Korea will be a factor in all of this. You know, President Obama went into office offering to reach out to North Korea, offering to engage, and North Korea rebuffed that in terms of actions and otherwise. So part of how, whether it's President Trump or Mr. Biden, part of how they proceed with North Korea after the election, that will, in many respects, also depend upon North Korea.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mr. William Tertrello. Will, great to have you with us today. He asks, are there Cuban medical persons in North Korea?
Will, I don't know if they are in North Korea today. That would not surprise me. As you know, the Cuban-North Korea relationship has remained active through the years. In terms of are they on the ground today inside North Korea? I don't know. Speaking of travel, however, Will's question reminds me that there have been news reports about a North Korean delegation going to China this month to seek assistance, at least to talk to the Chinese about aid and other issues. And I would imagine that COVID-19 would be a part of that.
Great. I think that's all the questions I see. I hope I'm not missing anyone. But if you have anything, please come in. Otherwise, we're going to close the session. Before turning to formally thank Keith, I just want to mention 2 upcoming programs. If you're not on the East-West Center in Washington's mailing list for programs and events, of course, you can go to the East-West Center website under events or sign up for our newsletter. Because of the time difference between our Honolulu and our Washington programs, sometimes if you're on the newsletter, you will get updates about when they are occurring at Eastern Standard Time. The next 2 programs on May 14th at 5 p.m. Is with a colleague in Australia, hence the 5 p.m. start time, which I know is a little bit late in the day, but in order to reach our Australian colleague, Dr. Denghua Zhang, who is a research faculty at the Australian National University and has a new book out on China's new aid agency and trilateral aid cooperation. He was an Asia Studies visiting fellow here in Washington and has returned to his institution at ANU and has a new book out. And there's been much discussion about China's role in the region, BRI projects, infrastructure, trade, investment, what have you. But this looks at the evolving nature of China's aid policy and aid institutions, and particularly collaboration with other partners. So I hope you'll join us on May 14th at 5 p.m. via Zoom for that. On May 26th, we have a number of experts, 3 in fact, Dr. Dan Markey at Johns Hopkins SAIS, formerly of the State Department Policy Planning staff, Dr. Joshua White, also at SAIS, was previously on the National Security Council working the South Asia beat, and our own senior advisor, Dr. Ellen Frost, who has held a number of government and academic appointments. And they are going to be speaking around the theme of China's evolving role in South Asia and looking at China's BRI projects, investment, trade, diplomacy in the countries of South Asia, not Southeast Asia. And that's May 26th at 10 a.m. Though other programs are in the works in terms of scheduling and coordination. So please stay tuned via our newsletter, our social media platforms, etc. And please do consider going to North Korea and the World website, as well as the Asia-Pacific Bulletin series on North Korea's external relations in the Indo-Pacific. And with that, Keith, once again, let me thank you for your collaboration with the East-West Center. Thank you for taking the time from your very hectic schedule to join us and give us an update on North Korea during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's an ideal opportunity to hear from someone who is really plugged in, watches and observes closely, and has a long, as well, policy as well as academic and historical context on the relationship. And really appreciate your remarks, and all the participants both on YouTube and on Zoom platform. Thank you for joining us and for your participation today. With that, wishing you good health and a good day. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.